Boss terminated me after 19 years, no explanation, but they didn't know about the files I kept. The coffee was still warm when they came for me. I remember that detail because it's funny how your brain latches onto the smallest things when your world is falling apart. Steam was still rising from my favorite mug, the one my daughter made in pottery class with "World's Best Mom" painted in crooked letters, when HR walked into my office with 2 security guards trailing behind like shadows. Maya Williams? The HR woman's voice was crisp, professional, the kind that's been practiced in front of mirrors. "I'm Sarah from Human Resources. We need you to come with us." 19 years. 19 years of arriving early, staying late, missing dance recitals and soccer games, pouring my soul into innovations that made this company billions. And this is how it ends? With a stranger who doesn't even know that I've been here since before this building had windows on the top floor? Is there a problem? I asked, though my stomach was already sinking. Something had felt off all week. The hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. The way David, my supposed mentor and the VP of engineering, had been avoiding eye contact during meetings. The strange email I'd received yesterday asking me to finalize all project documentation and ensure proper handover protocols. "Please gather your personal belongings," Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on a clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "You have 15 minutes. Personal belongings. As if 19 years of my life could be reduced to the contents of a desk drawer. I looked around my office, really looked at it, maybe for the first time in months. The wall covered with patents bearing my name. The photo of me shaking hands with the Secretary of Commerce when our quantum computing breakthrough earned national recognition. My daughter's artwork taped to the monitor. The small succulent plant that had somehow survived despite my terrible track record with living things. "What's this about?" I pressed, standing up slowly. The security guard shifted, and I caught a glimpse of the handcuffs on one of their belts. Handcuffs. Like I was some kind of criminal. "Company restructuring," Sarah said, still not meeting my eyes. "Your position has been eliminated as part of our Strategic Optimization Initiative." Strategic Optimization Initiative. Corporate speak for, "We're throwing you away." But something about this didn't add up. Just 3 days ago, I'd submitted the final design specifications for Project Ether, the revolutionary holographic interface system I'd been developing for 3 years. The project that was supposed to change everything. The project that kept me awake at night, not because I was worried about it, but because I was excited about what it could become. "I need to speak with David," I said, reaching for my phone. "Mr. Chun is in meetings all day," Sarah replied quickly. Too quickly. He's aware of the situation. Aware of the situation. David, who'd been my friend for over a decade. David, who'd celebrated with champagne when I cracked the holographic projection algorithm that everyone said was impossible. David, who'd promised me a promotion after Project Ether launched. He knew, and he hadn't even had the courage to face me. I started packing mechanically, my hands moving while my mind raced. The guards watched my every move like I might suddenly sprout wings and fly away with company secrets. One of them, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I need to check your bag." Of course they did. 19 years of dedicated service, and they suspected me of theft. I handed over my purse and watched him rifle through my life. Lipstick, car keys, my daughter's school photos, the protein bar I'd forgotten to eat at lunch. Nothing that could bring down their precious company. But they didn't know about the external hard drive. It was small, black, unremarkable. The kind of thing that could easily be mistaken for a phone charger or a USB adapter. I'd clipped it to my keychain months ago after a particularly nasty system crash had taught me the value of backing up everything. Everything. Design files, meeting recordings, email threads, prototype videos, even voice memos I'd recorded during late-night brainstorming sessions. The guard handed back my keys without a second glance. As we walked through the office, my office, the place where I'd spent more waking hours than my own home, I felt eyes on me. Co-workers pretended to be busy, but I could see them watching from their peripheral vision. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked guilty. Jennifer from the quantum team caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." At least someone had the decency to acknowledge what was happening. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt eternal. Sarah made small talk about the weather while the security guards stared at the numbers changing above the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to call my lawyer, my union rep, my daughter's father, who worked for the local news station. Instead, I stood there in silence, clutching my cardboard box of personal belongings, trying to process that my career had just ended without explanation. They escorted me to the parking garage, actually escorted me like I was a flight risk. Sarah handed me an envelope with my final paperwork and something about Cobra benefits, but her words sounded like they were coming from underwater. All I could think about was Project Ether. My baby. 3 years of innovation, late nights, breakthrough moments, and crushing setbacks. And now what? They were just going to continue without me? "Your company access has been revoked," Sarah said as I reached my car. "This includes email, building entry, and all system credentials. You'll receive information about your final paycheck and benefits in the mail." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The security guards waited until I drove out of the parking garage before disappearing back into the building. 19 years, and it ended with me crying in my Honda Civic in downtown traffic, wondering how I was going to explain to my 15-year-old daughter that mommy didn't have a job anymore. But as I sat at a red light, feeling the weight of that little hard drive on my keychain, something shifted inside me. They thought they could just erase me, delete my contributions like I was a typo in their success story. They had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks later, I was folding laundry in my living room when my daughter Zoe burst through the front door, backpack flying. Mom, you have to see this." She was practically vibrating with excitement, holding up her phone. "Your old company is on the news." I paused, a half-folded t-shirt in my hands. I'd been avoiding news about Nexus Dynamics like it was radioactive. Every mention felt like salt in an open wound. But Zoe's enthusiasm was infectious, and before I could stop myself, I was looking at her screen. There he was, Richard Blackwood, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, standing behind a sleek podium with that practice smile that had charmed investors for decades. The headline scrolling beneath him made my blood freeze. Nexus Dynamics unveils revolutionary holographic interface, Project Ether set to transform computing forever. Isn't that cool, Mom? It's like something from a sci-fi movie. Zoe flopped onto the couch, still mesmerized by the footage. "The guy says it's going to change everything. Imagine doing homework with floating screens." I couldn't breathe. On the screen, Richard was gesturing proudly at a demonstration unit. My demonstration unit. The exact holographic interface I'd spent 3 years perfecting. The curve projection nodes, the gesture recognition algorithms, even the distinctive blue glow I'd programmed because I thought it looked more futuristic than green. "Today marks a new era in human-computer interaction," Richard was saying, his voice smooth as silk. "Project Ether represents 5 years of intensive research and development by our world-class engineering team. This breakthrough wouldn't have been possible without the visionary leadership of our VP of Engineering, David Chen, and our brilliant quantum computing division." 5 years? I'd started the project 3 years ago. And visionary leadership of David Chen? David, who'd spent most of our project meetings playing with his phone and asking me to dumb it down for the executives. The camera panned across the audience, a sea of investors, tech journalists, and industry leaders, all applauding like trained seals. I spotted faces I recognized. Board members who'd shaken my hand at company parties. Colleagues who'd praised my work in emails. All of them celebrating my innovation like they'd never heard my name. "The commercial applications are limitless," Richard continued, and I watched in horror as he demonstrated features I'd designed. The intuitive gesture controls I'd based on sign language patterns I'd learned to communicate with my deaf cousin. The accessibility features I'd insisted on because technology should work for everyone, not just the privileged few. We expect Project Ether to generate over $2 billion in revenue within the first year alone. $2 billion. From my work, from late nights when I'd missed Zoe's bedtime stories because I was debugging projection algorithms. From weekends spent in the lab while other families were at barbecues and birthday parties. From the moment of pure joy when I'd finally cracked the quantum entanglement issue that everyone said was impossible. "Mom," Zoe's voice seemed to come from far away. "You okay? You look like you're going to be sick." I managed to nod, though my hands were shaking. On screen, Richard was fielding questions from reporters, effortlessly taking credit for every innovation I'd poured my soul into. When someone asked about the technical challenges, he smoothly deflected to David, who gave some generic answer about collaborative problem-solving and thinking outside the box. The worst part wasn't the theft. It was how thoroughly they'd erased me. Not a single mention of my name. No acknowledgement of the woman who'd made their billion-dollar breakthrough possible. I'd become a ghost in my own success story. After Zoe went to bed, I sat in my home office staring at the external hard drive. For 3 weeks, it had been just a painful reminder of my former life.
But now?
Now it felt like a weapon. I plugged it in with trembling fingers and watched as months of work populated my screen. Design files with timestamps showing the evolution of Project Ether from my initial sketches to the final specifications. Email threads where I'd solved technical problems that had stumped entire teams. Voice memos I'd recorded during those eureka moments when everything clicked into place. And then I found the video files. I'd forgotten about these. Short clips I'd recorded during prototype demonstrations, partly for documentation, and partly because I'd been so excited about what we were building. There I was 6 months ago, presenting to the executive team. My voice animated as I explained how the holographic projectors worked, how the gesture recognition could revolutionize accessibility technology, how this could change the world. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was David. Not leading, not contributing, just sitting there, nodding occasionally while I did all the talking. And there was Richard, leaning forward with interest, asking detailed questions about implementation and market potential. They knew. They'd always known whose work this really was. I opened my laptop and started organizing files. Screenshots of emails where executives had specifically asked for my input on Maya's project. Meeting notes where they'd referred to the prototype as Maya's baby. Design documents with my digital signature and personal coding style that was as distinctive as a fingerprint. But I needed more than evidence. I needed strategy. And for that, I needed someone who understood how to make powerful people pay for their crimes. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in months. Camille Rodriguez, JD. We'd been roommates in college before she went to law school, and I dove into engineering. She'd always been brilliant, the kind of person who could argue both sides of any issue and win. Last I'd heard, she was making partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the city's most aggressive litigation firms. The call went to voicemail. Of course it did. It was nearly midnight. But as I listened to her professional greeting, a plan began forming in my mind. "Camille, it's Maya Williams. I know it's been too long, but I need your help. I have a story to tell you about corporate theft, intellectual property fraud, and a company that thinks they can steal a Black woman's work without consequences. Call me back. We have some people to sue." I hung up and looked back at my screen, at months of evidence they didn't know I possessed. Richard Blackwood thought he could erase me from history. But he'd forgotten one crucial thing. I'd kept receipts. Camille called back at 6 a.m. sharp. I should have expected that. She'd always been an early riser, even in college when the rest of us were surviving on caffeine and determination. Maya Williams. Her voice was warm but professional over the phone. "I saw the news about Project Ether yesterday and wondered if you were involved. Then I got your message." I was already dressed and caffeinated, having barely slept. Involved? Camille, I created that entire system. Every algorithm, every interface design, every line of code. And they erased me like I never existed. Meet me at my office in an hour. Bring everything. Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building that screamed expensive legal services. Camille met me in the lobby, and I barely recognized the woman who used to stay up all night debating philosophy and eating cereal for dinner. This version wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her natural hair styled in a sophisticated twist that said she belonged in boardrooms. But when she smiled, she was still the same person who'd helped me through organic chemistry and listened to me cry over my first heartbreak. "You look good," she said, embracing me, "considering you just got royally screwed by corporate America." Her corner office overlooked the city, with law books lining the walls and certificates that made it clear she hadn't just made partner. She demolished every barrier in her path. She poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine while I connected my hard drive to her computer. "Walk me through everything," she said, settling into her chair with a legal pad. From the beginning, I told her about Project Ether, about the 3 years of development, about my sudden termination, and the public unveiling. She took notes in that precise handwriting I remembered from college, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made it clear her legal mind was already working. Then I showed her the files. Design documents, email chains, video footage of my presentations. Her expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. "This is solid," she said finally. "But before we go nuclear, I need to see your employment contracts, NDAs, any intellectual property agreements you signed." That's when my stomach dropped. "Camille, I don't have those anymore. They were in my company files, and my access was revoked." She leaned back in her chair, thinking, "When did you start at Nexus?" 19 years ago, fresh out of grad school. "And when did you last update your employment agreements?" I tried to remember. There were a few updates over the years. The last major one was maybe 7 years ago, when they restructured the IP policies. Camille's eyes lit up with something that looked suspiciously like hunter's instinct. "Maya, this might be our smoking gun. Do you have any copies of your original agreements? I might have something at home. I keep old paperwork in a filing cabinet, but I haven't looked at it in years." "Go get it."
"Now." "And Maya?"
She stood up, extending her hand. "I'm taking your case. Pro bono." "Camille, you don't have to. They stole $2 billion worth of your work and erased a black woman from tech history." "Oh, I'm taking this case." 2 hours later, I was back in her office with a manila folder full of yellow documents. Employment contracts, benefit summaries, and buried at the bottom, my original intellectual property agreement from 2005. Camille spread the papers across her conference table like she was solving a puzzle. After 20 minutes of reading, cross-referencing, and making notes, she looked up with a smile that would have terrified a shark. "Maya, do you remember who drafted the original IP language for this contract?" I squinted at the document. Wait, wasn't there some kind of committee? They asked for input from senior engineers because the legal team didn't understand the technical implications. "And did you participate in that committee?" The memory came flooding back.
"Yes."
I was one of the junior members, but I suggested several amendments because the original language was too broad. I argued that individual contributors should retain more rights to their innovations, especially for projects they initiated independently. Camille handed me a magnifying glass and pointed to a section of fine print. "Read Clause 7.3.2. I read it aloud. "In cases where an employee initiates and substantially develops a proprietary technology or innovation independent of direct company assignment, said employee retains co-ownership rights and must be credited in all public disclosures and commercial applications." Now look at this. She showed me a more recent version of the IP agreement for my files. Notice anything missing? The clause was gone, completely removed. They amended the agreements for all existing employees 7 years ago, I said slowly, understanding dawning. But this original version is legally binding and was never formally superseded for your specific innovations that predated the amendment. Project Ether began development 3 years ago, but the foundational research and initial concepts go back further, don't they? I nodded, my heart racing. The holographic projection theories I started working on in my spare time 5 years ago. I presented preliminary findings at an internal innovation showcase. Before the contract amendment, Camille gathered the papers with the efficiency of someone who just found the keys to the kingdom. "Maya, Not only do they owe you credit and compensation, but they may have violated federal intellectual property laws by deliberately concealing your contributions. What does that mean? It means we're not just suing for acknowledgement. We're going after them for fraud, breach of contract, and willful infringement. And because they've already made public claims about Project Ether generating billions, we can prove damages. I felt dizzy. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $50 million in damages, plus injunctive relief that could halt their entire product launch until they properly credit your work. $50 million. I thought about my mortgage, about Zoe's college fund, about all the nights I'd worried about making ends meet on unemployment benefits. There's more, Camille continued. Because they terminated you right after you submitted the final specifications, we can argue this was retaliation designed to steal your work. That adds punitive damages and possibly criminal charges. When do we start? We already have. She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. Jenny, I need you to file an emergency motion for preliminary injunction. Target is Nexus Dynamics, intellectual property theft and fraud. And Jenny, call the press. It's time the world knew the real story behind Project Ether. As she spoke, I looked out at the city skyline at the Nexus Dynamics building visible in the distance. For 3 weeks, I'd felt powerless, erased, forgotten. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that the woman they tried to erase was the same woman who'd helped write the very contract that would bring them down. Some lessons are expensive. This one was going to cost them everything. The first shot was fired at 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when Camille called, her voice crackling with electricity. Maya, we just served Nexus with a cease and desist order. They have 48 hours to halt all Project Ether operations and issue a public statement acknowledging your contributions. What do you think they'll do? Panic. Then lawyer up. Then try to discredit us.
She paused.
Are you ready for this to get ugly? I thought about 19 years of my life, about Zoe's college fund, about the way they'd walked me out like a criminal. Bring it on. The response came faster than expected. By noon, I had 3 missed calls from David Chen. I let them go to voicemail, but his messages grew increasingly desperate. Maya, call me back. We need to talk. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. Maya, please. The lawyers are going crazy. Just call me so we can work this out. Maya, for God's sake, pick up the phone. You're making a huge mistake. I wasn't making a mistake. I was making a statement. The real fireworks started when Camille released the evidence. Not everything, she was too smart for that, but enough to make the tech world take notice. A carefully curated package sent to TechCrunch, Wired, and the Wall Street Journal, containing time-stamped design documents, email chains, and one devastating piece of video footage, me presenting the Project Ether prototype to the executive team 6 months earlier. Revolutionary holographic interface technology developed by Nexus engineer Maya Williams may have been deliberately concealed from public credit, read the TechCrunch headline that went live at 3 p.m. My phone exploded. Reporters, former colleagues, random people who'd found my number online. I turned it off after the 15th call and watched the story spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtag Project Ether began trending within 2 hours, followed quickly by hashtag Maya Williams and hashtag Tech Theft. The most satisfying moment came when I saw Jennifer from my old quantum team post on LinkedIn. I worked with Maya Williams for 5 years. Project Ether was 100% her vision and innovation. Shame on Nexus Dynamics for trying to erase her contributions. Others followed. Engineers who'd collaborated with me, interns I'd mentored, even some executives who'd witnessed my presentations. Not everyone, corporate fear ran deep, but enough to create a growing chorus of voices saying the same thing. Maya Williams was the real architect of Project Ether. Nexus's initial response was predictably corporate. A bland statement about reviewing the claims and standing behind their talented engineering team. But I could read between the lines. They were rattled. The second wave hit them Thursday morning. Camille had spent 2 days building an airtight case, and when she filed the official lawsuit, it was devastating. 53 pages of legal precision, laying out not just intellectual property theft, but fraud, breach of contract, and conspiracy to conceal employee contributions. The damages sought weren't just $50 million anymore. They were asking for $120 million, plus injunctive relief that would finish Project Ether in its tracks. That's when they tried to buy me off. The call came from Richard Blackwood himself, not through lawyers or intermediaries. Just him, personally, at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, catching me while I was helping Zoe with her physics homework. "Maya, I think we got off on the wrong foot." His voice was smooth, practiced. "I'd like to invite you to dinner this weekend. Just the two of us, to discuss this situation like adults. Adults don't steal other people's work and claim it as their own." There seems to be some confusion about the development timeline. There's no confusion, Richard. I have 3 years of documentation proving I created Project Ether. What I don't have is any explanation for why you fired me 3 days after I submitted the final specifications. A pause. "Maya, you're a brilliant engineer. You always have been. Sometimes in large organizations, individual contributions can get overlooked. That doesn't mean we don't value what you've done." Overlooked? You announced a $2 billion product launch without mentioning my name once. We can fix this. A consulting contract, retroactive recognition, even a VP position if you're interested. This lawsuit hurts everyone, you, us, the entire industry. I almost laughed. Now I'm valuable? Funny how that works. What do you want, Maya? Money? Recognition? A public apology? Name your price. What did I want? 3 weeks ago, I might have taken a settlement. Enough money to secure Zoe's future, maybe a quiet acknowledgement buried in a press release. But something had changed. Maybe it was seeing my work unveiled like I'd never existed. Maybe it was the support from former colleagues. Maybe it was just that I was tired of being erased. I want the truth, Richard. All of it. Public acknowledgement that Project Ether was my innovation, my design, my 3 years of work. I want the patents corrected to show me as the primary inventor. And I want answers about why you fired me. Maya, be reasonable. I am being reasonable.
Your lawyers aren't.
Neither are your investors, apparently. That hit home. Nexus stock had dropped 8% since the story broke, wiping out nearly $1 billion in market value. The tech blogs were calling it the biggest intellectual property scandal since the early days of Silicon Valley. Think about your daughter, Maya. This kind of public battle, it affects families. Zoe doesn't need to see her mother dragged through the mud. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Richard, you just made your second big mistake. The first was stealing my work. The second was threatening my family. I hung up. When Camille called an hour later, I told her about the conversation. "Perfect," she said. "We'll add witness intimidation to the charges." Maya, they're desperate. And desperate people make stupid decisions. What's our next move? Tomorrow, we hold a press conference. Time for the world to meet the real inventor of Project Ether. As I tucked Zoe into bed that night, she asked me about all the phone calls, the reporters, the strange energy crackling through our house. "Mom, are you famous now?" "I don't know, baby, but I'm finally being heard." She smiled.
Good.
"You've got important things to say."
Yeah.
I did. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the downtown Marriott. By 9:30, the room was packed. I stood backstage, hands trembling slightly as I watched reporters file in. CNN, NBC, local news stations, tech bloggers with cameras, even some faces I didn't recognize but who looked important enough to be there. Camille had warned me it would be big, but seeing it made my stomach flip. "You ready?" Camille appeared beside me, looking every inch the powerhouse attorney in her charcoal suit.
No.
But let's do it anyway. The moment I walked to the podium, camera flashes exploded like lightning. I'd never been comfortable with attention. I was an engineer, someone who preferred the quiet satisfaction of solving problems behind the scenes. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, I thought about Zoe watching at home, about all the young Black girls in STEM who needed to see that their work mattered, that they couldn't be erased. "My name is Maya Williams," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 4 weeks ago, I was terminated from Nexus Dynamics after 19 years of service. 3 days later, they unveiled Project Ether, the holographic interface system I spent 3 years developing, without mentioning my name once. I clicked to my first slide, a timestamped design document from 2 years earlier, clearly showing my name as the primary architect. This is not about money. This is about truth. This is about a Black woman in tech being systematically erased from her own innovations. The questions came fast and sharp. Ms. Williams, Nexus claims Project Ether was a team effort spanning 5 years. How do you respond? I have 3 years of documentation proving I initiated this project. If they have 5 years of development, they should be able to produce evidence of the 2 years that supposedly predated my involvement. They can't because it doesn't exist. What's your response to CEO Richard Blackwood's statement that you were terminated for performance issues? I smiled grimly. Performance issues? I submitted the final design specifications for their billion-dollar product 3 days before they fired me. If that's poor performance, I'd hate to see what they consider excellence. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I clicked to the video footage, crystal clear recordings of me presenting Project Ether to the executive team, explaining every technical detail while David Chin sat silently in the corner. This footage is from 6 months ago. I want you to listen carefully to who's doing the explaining, who understands the technology, and who's actually leading this so-called team effort. The room fell silent as my recorded voice filled the space, walking through holographic projection algorithms, discussing patent applications, responding to detailed technical questions from executives. It was devastating evidence, and everyone in that room knew it. One final point, I said as the video ended. Yesterday, CEO Richard Blackwood called me personally to offer a settlement. During that conversation, he suggested that this lawsuit might negatively affect my 15-year-old daughter. I want to be clear. Threatening a child to silence her mother is not just unethical, it's actionable. The reporters exploded, shouting questions, demanding details, scribbling notes furiously. I answered what I could, then stepped back and let Camille handle the legal specifics. The impact was immediate and devastating. By noon, #TechThreats was trending alongside #MayaWilliams. Video clips from the press conference had gone viral. The footage of me presenting Project Ether was being shared thousands of times with captions like, "This is what stolen brilliance looks like," and say her name, Maya Williams. At 2 p.m., Nexus's stock dropped another 12%. At 4 p.m., 3 board members resigned. At 6 p.m., their biggest investor pulled out, citing concerns about corporate and ethical leadership. But the real earthquake hit at 8 p.m. I was making dinner when every news alert on my phone went off simultaneously. CNN's breaking news banner said it all. Nexus Dynamics CEO Richard Blackwood resigns for personal reasons following Project Ether scandal. His resignation letter was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. After careful consideration and reflection on the company's future direction, I had decided to step down to pursue other opportunities and spend more time with my family. No mention of intellectual property theft. No mention of the $120 million lawsuit. No mention of threatening a child. Just the usual sanitized corporate exit. But the tech world saw right through it. The headlines were brutal. CEO falls after stealing employees' billion-dollar innovation. Black woman engineer topples tech giant after exposing systematic erasure. Project Ether's scandal claims Nexus CEO. What's next for the company? My favorite came from a prominent Black tech blogger. Maya Williams didn't just demand credit for her work, she demanded accountability for an entire industry that profits from erasing women of color. The phone rang constantly. Interview requests, speaking opportunities, job offers from competitors who suddenly remembered my 19 years of contributions to the field. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that I'd proven I couldn't be silenced, everyone wanted to hear what I had to say. Zoe found me on the couch that evening, scrolling through social media responses to the day's events. "Mom, you're everywhere," she said, curling up beside me. "My friends are texting me articles about you. Sarah's mom said you're a hero." "I'm not a hero, baby. I'm just someone who refused to disappear. Same thing, she said with 15-year-old certainty. Maybe she was right. But as I watched Richard Blackwood's empire crumble on the evening news, all I could think about was what came next. They tried to erase me, and I'd fought back. But destruction was only the first part. Now it was time to build something better. 6 months later, I stood in front of a gleaming glass building in the tech district, watching workers install the sign. Ether Labs, founded by Dr. Maya Williams, PhD. Dr. Maya Williams. I'd gone back to using my full title after years of downplaying my credentials in corporate meetings where being too academic was somehow a liability. Not anymore. The settlement with Nexus had been swift once Richard was gone. The new CEO, a woman, interestingly enough, wanted the scandal buried as quickly and completely as possible. $85 million, public acknowledgement of my contributions, and most importantly, all patents corrected to show me as the primary inventor. Camille had negotiated brilliantly, but the real victory was watching them scramble to rebuild their reputation while I built something entirely new. Mom, this is insane, Zoe said, spinning around in the empty lobby. At 16, she'd grown 3 inches and developed the kind of confidence that came from watching her mother take on Fortune 500 companies and win. You're like actually famous now. Famous wasn't the word I'd use. Vindicated, maybe. Visible, definitely. The speaking engagements had started immediately. Tech conferences, women's leadership summits, university commencements. Everyone wanted to hear the story of the Black woman engineer who'd refused to be erased. But speaking was just the beginning. Dr. Williams? My assistant Marcus appeared from the elevator, tablet in hand. 24 years old, brilliant, and poached from Google with the promise that at Ether Labs, his innovations would have his name on them from day one. The engineering team is ready for your walkthrough. The top 3 floors were mine: research labs, development studios, and collaboration spaces designed specifically for the kind of breakthrough thinking that corporate bureaucracy strangled. No endless meetings about meetings. No executives who understood buzzwords but not science. Just brilliant minds working on problems that mattered. Maya, Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation to David, thankfully, waved from across the main lab. She'd been one of the first people I'd recruited, a quantum computing specialist who'd left MIT when I explained my vision. Wait until you see what the team's been working on. The holographic display they'd assembled was breathtaking. Not just an improvement on Project Ether, but something entirely revolutionary. 3-dimensional interfaces that responded to thought patterns, accessibility features that could help blind users navigate digital spaces, applications for remote surgery, and space exploration. This is what Project Ether should have been, Sarah said, her eyes bright with excitement. Without corporate limitations, without cost-cutting measures that sacrifice innovation for profit margins. I ran my fingers through the holographic projections, watching light bend and shift in response to my movements. This was mine. Not just the technology, but the vision, the execution, the future it represented. No one could take this away or claim they'd thought of it first. Dr. Williams? Marcus appeared again, looking slightly nervous. There's someone here to see you. Says he's from Nexus Dynamics. I found David Chin waiting in the lobby, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. He'd aged in the past 6 months, stress lines around his eyes, gray creeping into his hair. The interim VP position at Nexus apparently wasn't agreeing with him. Maya, he said, standing as I approached. Congratulations on all this. He gestured vaguely at the building, the success, the empire I'd built from the ashes of my former life. David, I'm surprised they let you come here. I'm not here officially. He shifted nervously. I wanted to apologize. What happened to you, what we did, it wasn't right. No, it wasn't. I should have spoken up. Should have fought for you. I was a coward. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or corporate agenda. But all I saw was genuine regret and the weight of consequences he hadn't anticipated. I agreed. But apologies don't undo 19 years of taking credit for other people's work. I know. But, Maya, we need you back. The company is struggling. Project Ether's launch was a disaster without your expertise. Stock price is still falling. The board is talking about bankruptcy. I almost laughed. You want me to save the company that threw me away? We give you anything. CEO, position, equity stake, complete control over engineering. David. I cut him off gently. I don't want to save Nexus Dynamics. I want to replace it. His face fell as the reality hit him. I wasn't just another engineer they'd discarded. I was their competition now, and I was winning. The team you see behind me? I gestured toward the labs where brilliant minds were solving tomorrow's problems. Half of them are former Nexus employees. People who got tired of having their innovations buried in committee meetings and stolen by executives. Maya, please. Dr. Williams, I corrected. And David, tell your board that Ether Labs is hiring. Anyone from Nexus who wants to work somewhere their contributions matter. We have positions open. After he left, I stood in my lobby, looking up at the company logo etched in the glass. Ether Labs. My name on the building. My vision driving the innovation. My voice at every conference and patent filing. They tried to erase me, but I'd become impossible to ignore. Zoe appeared beside me, following my gaze upward. So, what's next, Dr. Mom? I smiled, thinking about the prototypes upstairs, the patents pending, the future we were building one breakthrough at a time. Everything, baby. Everything.